We've all heard the famous words from Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, it sounds so good, but sometimes, depending upon who the neighbor is, it may be a little bit easier said than done. Joining me now from Toronto to chat about this is Lynda MacGibbon. She's the Vice President of People and Culture for InterVarsity Canada and author of the book, My Vertical Neighborhood, How Strangers Became a Community. Lynda, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. Really great to be here with you today.
Good to have you. Now, can you share a little bit about how this book came about? I understand you moved from a small town setting to a much larger, radically different area?
That's correct. I didn't set out to write the book. The book happened out of my life. So about 10 years ago, I was offered a transfer. I was working with InterVarsity at the time in the East Coast in New Brunswick, lived in the town of Moncton, New Brunswick. They asked me to move to Toronto, and I initially, like most East Coasters, said no. But the job intrigued me, and so I decided to make a shift. I was just about to turn 50 years old, so it was kind of a big life change for me. I lived in a house in a neighborhood in a rural, across the river from Moncton in a smaller suburb, and I made the move and ended up living in a condominium tower, about 26 stories on the shores of Lake Ontario. So a significant move just as I turned 50.
You know, I remember when I lived in Southern Ontario in Hamilton, I drove my kids all the way to Charlottetown, PEI, and back in 9 days. What an incredible adventure that was, a journey. But I do remember, Lynda, when we stopped off in the Maritimes provinces, whether it was Halifax or we went to Cavendish Beach and PEI, the Maritimers were so friendly. I couldn't believe how friendly they were. And then when I came back to Southern Ontario, I'm like, wait a minute, and I'm in Toronto, they're not as friendly here. What's going on? Did you notice that as well? Small town compared to the metro center, people in the smaller towns are that much friendlier?
I would say yes and no. So, I'm a proud East Coaster, and I think we are a very friendly people. And Toronto is a huge multicultural city. So yes, people dropped in on me more frequently, more easily, perhaps, because I knew them. And I think there is, in high rises in particular, perhaps a bit of a protocol that you follow because you live so close to each other. You try to be a bit more careful. But I don't know, I'm beginning to wonder if the friendliness factor has been decreasing all over the place. And so it's maybe a little harder wherever you live.
You know what's really sad is, it's very true. Here in Southern Alberta, when I used to live in Calgary, and I bought a house and I moved into this neighborhood, and I talked to my neighbor, he says, thank God you came out to say hi. I said, what do you mean? Well, the previous owner lived there 10 years, he never said hi to me once. I'm like, what? That's just, I can't even fathom that. That's unbelievable. Now, when people hear, love thy neighbor, what do you think that really means?
That's the question that I posed really when I started to write the story that's in the book. And I started to write the story within about 3 years of living into the story, and then I continued to write it for a long time. When I first came to Toronto, I came with the question, what would it look like to love my neighbors? Or what had happened if I followed this commandment? And then I started asking the question, what does love mean in the context of neighbors? And I can tell you some things that I don't think it means, or it doesn't mean in its entirety. I don't think it means in its entirety that you tolerate them, or that you notice them, or that you are kind to them even, or, friendly, although it does mean all of those things. I think maybe a good place to start is 1 Corinthians 13, that beautiful chapter on love. Love is patient, love is kind, love perseveres. I think loving our neighbors is about seeing people, being present to them, treating them as sacred, treating them as really worthwhile. So it's a deeper thing than neighborliness, which maybe is a superficial hello, pass by on the street.
And I need to borrow your drill, or in the wintertime, I need to borrow your shovel, or maybe some sugar. That kind of helps too sometimes.
Yeah. Those are starting points.
So Lynda, you felt a calling to really love your neighbor, especially those you shared an apartment building with. How did you go about doing this? And did people kind of freak out a little bit when you reached out to them? Did you jump out and offer a hug prior to COVID?
Yeah, no, that's not my style. I wanted to do it, and I moved into the building and began to think about how could I do it and how could I leave space for it. I joined the gardening committee in the condo. I would go to the condo Christmas parties, but I wasn't really brave enough just to invite people into my apartment. I was living alone. It was like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I prayed a lot. I was friendly, but it actually took a colleague of mine moving into the building, Rachel, as she's called in the book. And she had a similar value for meeting people and inviting people in. And I discovered, oh, it's a lot easier if there's two people. So whether it's a family, a couple, or a couple of neighbors who get together, it became much easier if together we offered invitations to people, two people living in a building saying, oh, we're doing something together. Do you want to join us? Was a whole lot easier. And just for me personally, less risky than doing it on my own.
Maybe that's the key there, Lynda. You're right, is to get involved in maybe a group, perhaps. Let's say it's not as intimidating. Instead of just inviting somebody over to your house, like you said, in a gardening group, getting involved in the gardening community. That way you can kind of get to know people in a different setting, right? A more comfortable setting with more people around.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It starts slowly, but I believe that living into the commandment to love your neighbor as Jesus gave it to us, it does actually take more than me alone. Jesus sent disciples out 2 by 2. We're taught so much to be in community, to be a people who go together. And it's just less tiring if you have a friend or a family member or a spouse or somebody who you can do that with.
What are some of the ways you discovered, Lynda, to help people to bring down their walls, make it a safe place for people to really open up to you and be themselves?
I think a key is that I had to become a bit uncomfortable myself. So I couldn't be the person who had everything neat and tidy and never shared anything about myself or wasn't vulnerable, but actually had to be truthful and honest with people. I had to meet them kind of on their terms. So I tell some stories in the book where I thought that I could spend an hour with a new neighbor, but ended up spending a whole day, which was far beyond what I was expecting. But giving the gift of time, said to somebody, oh, I think I actually do matter to this person. I think asking questions of people, being curious, also is really helpful. People like to talk about themselves mostly. So if we ask them about themselves, start to learn and listen, and then ask more questions, I actually believe that also really helps people feel
Yeah,
seen,
you get to know
heard.
them a little bit better too at the same time. But Lynda, let me ask you something. How many of us do you think are really lonely?
Well, it's probably a pandemic just like the COVID pandemic right now. And, different parts of the world. In England, they created a minister of loneliness for the government. So I do believe that people are lonely. I don't think it's the only thing that people are looking for is companionship or friendliness, but I do believe that people feel increasingly isolated and increasingly lonely. I think it's a human condition. I tell stories in the book about my own sense of loneliness, even though I have friends, I have family, I have good connections with people, but we will all feel it in some way at some time in our life.
It doesn't say in the Bible that no man is an island. I mean, no person should be an island. We need that human interaction. It makes it even more challenging during the pandemic with all of the restrictions and the lockdowns. What do you think it is, Lynda, that our neighbors really need and what they're longing for, outside of sugar or maybe a snowblower?
Yeah. Another excellent question. And as I think about it, I think, wow, it's hard to stereotype. Some people do actually, and in my experience, some people wanted a really good friend that they could spend time with and do things with and have conversations with. Some people just wanted somebody who would check in on them every now and then, or be aware, or help them move something. Some people want to have deep conversations, and some people do not. Some people just want, we did for a number of years a Monday night dinner where we just said, it's Monday night, it's the first night of the work week, you're back to, nobody wants to eat alone. So why don't we do Monday night dinners? And lots of people came to those Monday night dinners. I think people don't want to eat alone. They want to share a meal and talk about something. They want to laugh together. So people want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to be engaged with. But it's individual to each person. So again, that curiosity factor is pretty important as we get to know people.
So as you get to know your neighbor a little bit more and they want to have a deeper conversation with you, then all of a sudden you find out they have complete opposite interests to you. They're completely think different politically. They lean a completely different way. They may not be a Christian at all. In fact, they may even be an atheist. So how do you handle that situation? And they may even become a little aggressive in their conversation with you.
Absolutely. I think curiosity helps again, non-defensiveness, and just being prepared to be uncomfortable. Like I think in lots of situations I became uncomfortable, but then I want to ask the question, okay, why am I uncomfortable? Who is this person in front of me? Are they worth engaging with? Are they a real human person? Why do they think the way they do? What's going on with them? Asking those questions. Tell me what you believe. Why do you believe that? Can I tell you what I believe? You know, gee, it's really different than what you believe, but help me understand you. So I actually think it's engaging in conversation that's more than superficial, but not easy to do. Not easy to do.
I agree.
Helps to have friends to debrief with later.
And you know what's interesting too? Sometimes I find out the people who've walked away from the church, walked away from Christ, are people who are hurting in a very big way, you know, and they have
Yeah,
that huge emptiness, that
frequently.
void that only God can fill. And so you have to understand where that pain and that suffering is coming from originally, so you can sympathize and be a sounding board and then be able to reach out to them in a loving way. Now, how about an offer to pray for someone? Have you ever been shot down in that regard?
Yes, I have. Um, I have offered to pray for people and they've said, absolutely no, I don't want that. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Or you can pray for me by yourself, but don't pray for me like in front of me. That's really freaky. Um, so generally, I don't know that anybody has ever said, don't pray for me on your own. Most people, even if they don't believe in God, well, if you believe in God, why not? You know, maybe, I don't know. So I think that I have had people say to me, oh, don't pray for me right now. And sometimes there's a story in the book where I actually go ahead and pray for somebody on a phone message. My friend Brian initially reacted with kind of horror that I had done that. But then he listened to the prayer and told me that it was helpful. So it's a risk to offer it, but I think it's a risk worth taking.
Yeah. Lynda, once the provinces start opening up a little bit more and we have more freedom, you know, for worshiping, getting together in larger groups in churches, and you want to reach out to somebody, invite them to a church, how do you go about doing that? Because sometimes that can be an uncomfortable conversation for you and for the other person.
Yes, I think it comes up in conversations because you're talking about something else. Or sometimes you just tell a story to somebody like, oh, you know, I'm going back to church once church opens. I'm looking forward to it. I've had people say to me, oh, you go to church? Can I come with you sometime? And well, like, of course you can come with me. People are curious. So I think sometimes just telling people you do it yourself. I go to church if you ever want to come with me, you're welcome to come. Um, and maybe after things open up and people have been so isolated and have missed gathering together, people will have a little bit more interest in it actually as a place to go and be with people.
We need to be fed spiritually and we need that human interaction, as you and I talked about. Lynda, we only have about a minute left here. Any final thoughts on how to step out in faith out of your comfort zone and love thy neighbor?
Pray. You know, if you're afraid and nervous, I think that's a very normal way to feel. We all have fears about it, but take the commandment seriously. I think it's probably more necessary in our world now than we even could possibly imagine. And Christians know the command and probably should be following it.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. Amen. Lynda MacGibbon, she's the author of My Vertical Neighborhood, How Strangers Became a Community. Thanks for joining me today from Toronto.
Thanks very much.